Have you ever come
I am
home
so
thinking everything
sorry.
was fine, only to find your
Forgive
parents
me.
huddled together in the rain,
I let
waiting
you
for you?
suffer.
This millionaire thought success meant never looking back until one stormy night changed everything he believed about love, family, and forgiveness. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The city shimmered beneath a thin veil of early snow, each flake sliding down the vast glass wall of Julian Hartwell's penthouse before melting into silence. Inside, the space glowed with the sterile perfection of a showroom, chrome counters, leather couches, a grand piano that no one had touched in years. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound brave enough to break the hush. On the television, a morning anchor's voice announced, "Tech visionary Julian Hartwell unveils another record quarter for Hartwell Systems." The applause from a distant world filled the room for 10 seconds, then faded. Julian stood by the window, jacket still on from the board meeting, the skyline of Boston spreading out beneath him like circuitry efficient, bright, lifeless. He loosened his tie and reached for a glass of scotch, watching the amber liquid catch the light. Success distilled into silence. Somewhere below, a taxi horn echoed, lonely as a gull. The elevator chimed, and Camille Rhodes stepped out, heels tapping on marble. She was all sharp lines and perfect timing, a woman who could turn numbers into gold and hearts into afterthoughts. "You disappeared before the investors left," she said, setting her tablet on the counter. "They wanted you to toast the expansion deal." Julian's eyes stayed on the skyline. "You handled it." "I always do." She poured herself wine, noticed the framed photo on the console, a younger Julian, smiling between an older man and woman in front of a small Vermont house. Her lip tightened. "You should put that away before the press tour tomorrow. Doesn't fit the image." He looked at her reflection in the glass. "Which image is that?" "The one that sells," she replied lightly, then tapped her screen again. "Also, your father called this morning. Or someone using his name. Julian turned. A muscle flickered in his jaw. "Did he leave a message?" "Something about Thanksgiving dinner. I deleted it. You're not really the family holiday type." She said it like a compliment. The room felt colder. Julian set down his glass and crossed to the bookshelf. Behind a row of awards sat an old silver pocket watch, its hinge scratched, the initials WH faint on the back. He pressed the lid open. It still ticked. The sound was small but insistent, like a heartbeat that refused to die under all the glass and noise. Camille's voice floated from the kitchen. "Don't forget, the Hartwell Foundation Gala's Thursday. Try to smile this time. Investors love the humble genius act." He closed the watch. "I'll try." Later that night, when she was asleep and the city below pulsed with red taillights, Julian sat alone at the desk. The glow from the laptop lit the room in cold blue. He scrolled through his calendar. Strategy calls, investor dinners, press shoots. His eyes caught a handwritten note stuck to the corner of the monitor. The ink faded but still legible. "Thanksgiving family dinner at 6, if Julian comes." He stared at it for a long time. Snow brushed the window again, soft as breath. The scotch had gone flat. The watch ticked steadily beside the glass. In the quiet, something old and stubborn began to stir an ache he hadn't named in years. Outside, a church bell marked 11. Inside, Julian Hartwell realized that success had become his only companion, and even it was starting to sound lonely. Morning crept in pale and reluctant, laying silver over the city. Julian hadn't slept. The skyline outside had turned to mist, and in its blur, he could almost imagine the hills of Vermont soft, amber, breathing with pine. He poured coffee that had cooled overnight and stood barefoot by the window. Down on the street, people hurried through slush with their collars up, each face fixed on some private destination. He wondered if anyone among them was going home for Thanksgiving. Camille moved through the apartment with the calm precision of a woman who timed her days by market reports. "The driver will be here at 9, she said, brushing on lipstick. "We're meeting the Zurich investors over brunch." Julian answered without turning. "Cancel it." She paused. "Excuse me?" "I said cancel it." He set the mug down, watching the coffee ripple. "I need a few days out of the city." Camille laughed, softly, not kindly. "Julian, we're on the verge of closing a $20 million merger. This isn't the time to chase nostalgia." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw the distance he had built brick by brick between himself and every gentle thing that had ever loved him. "I'll be back by Monday," he said. "Thanksgiving's on Thursday. The company will survive without me for one dinner." Her expression cooled. "If you leave now, the board will question your commitment." Maybe they should. He took his coat from the rack. The pocket watch slipped inside like a weight he needed to carry. Camille's voice followed him. "You walk out that door, Julian, and you walk away from everything you built." He stopped at the threshold. "Everything I built isn't worth much if it can't stand without me." "Oh." The elevator doors closed, sealing her silence behind polished steel. Down in the garage, his car waited like an old friend he hadn't called in years. He keyed the ignition. The engine hummed, steady and low. As he steered onto the highway, the city's glass towers disappeared in the mirror. Snow turned to rain as he drove north, the world softening mile by mile. On the radio, an announcer's gentle drawl filled the cabin. "Good morning, folks. Thanksgiving week's rolling in with gray skies and a touch of heart. So wherever you're headed, drive safe and maybe call your folks when you get there." Julian almost smiled. The windshield wipers kept time with the pocket watch ticking in his coat. He stopped once, at a roadside diner, the kind that smelled of bacon and brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The waitress called everyone Han, and the counter gleamed from years of elbows and stories. A trucker beside him raised his mug. "Heading home, friend?" Julian hesitated. "I guess I am." "Well, good for you," the man said, grinning. "World needs more folks remembering where they come from." When Julian stepped back outside, rain misted across the parking lot. He tilted his face up to it. The chill felt honest, like something that didn't need permission to touch him. He breathed in the scent of wet asphalt and pine drifting from the north. Somewhere beyond the clouds waited the small town he'd left behind, still holding a dinner chair for the son who never called. He climbed into the car again, headlights cutting through the gray. The wipers whispered across the glass, steady as a heartbeat. Ahead, the sign on the interstate flickered into view. Maple Hollow, 6 miles. Julian Hartwell tightened his grip on the wheel, and for the first time in years, his heart whispered, "Maybe it's time." Rain kept pace with him up the interstate, a thin gray ribbon unwinding between pine and granite. Julian drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the old pocket watch on the seat. Boston had vanished behind him, its towers swallowed by fog and distance, but the tension of years still rode his shoulders like a tailored coat that no longer fit. Every few miles, the radio faded in and out of old country songs, their static soft harmonies painting ghosts of another time. The highway stretched quiet and endless. Billboards promised maple syrup, antique barns, and the best pie in Vermont. He smiled faintly. His mother would have laughed at that. She had once said you could judge a town by its pie crust, how much care folks put into something small. He hadn't thought of that in years. As the miles passed, the rhythm of the wipers became the heartbeat of memory. He remembered his father's truck rattling over this same road decades ago. The window cracked to let in the smell of pine. Back then, he'd counted every mile marker, asking when they'd reach the county fair. Now he counted exits, wondering if the house on Willow Street still stood, if anyone had replaced the porch light that never turned off. Rain thickened near Lebanon. He pulled into a small gas station glowing under a tin awning, the kind that sold hot coffee and hunting magazines. A bell jingled as he entered. Behind the counter stood a man in flannel, gray at the temples, wiping down the register. "Morning, friend," the clerk said. "Heading home for the holiday?" Julian hesitated, rainwater dripping from his sleeve. "I think so." The man nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. "Drive safe. Roads get slick up past Hanover." He poured coffee into a paper cup and slid it over. "On the house. Guess everyone's trying to make it home this week." "No." Julian accepted the cup, warmth seeping into his palms. Through the window, he saw families gassing up kids in back seats, dogs barking, laughter through cracked windows. For a moment, he envied them their simple urgency, that shared purpose of going home because it mattered. He wondered when he'd stopped believing it mattered. Back in the car, he left the radio off. Silence felt more honest. The road narrowed into curves, lined with red barns and misty fields. Here and there, smoke curled from farmhouse chimneys. He rolled the window slightly. The air smelled of wet hay and wood smoke. He could almost taste the years he'd lost. By late afternoon, clouds thinned into a dull silver sky. A sign appeared. Welcome to Vermont, the green mountain state. Julian slowed, taking in the first sweep of hills. They rose, like old friends lifting their arms to greet him. Somewhere beyond them waited Maple Hollow, the town he'd outgrown, but never escaped. He glanced at the pocket watch on the seat. It ticked, steady, patient, forgiving. Another 50 miles, maybe less. He wasn't sure what waited at the end of that road, resentment, forgiveness, or only rain, but he felt something loosen in his chest, a thread pulling him forward. The drizzle turned soft again, gentler, as if the sky itself wanted to ease his return. Ahead, the first orange leaves of late fall clung to the trees, like tiny flames refusing to go out. Julian pressed the accelerator and watched them blur into color and motion, the heartbeat of home growing louder with every mile. Twilight crept in quietly, smudging the sky into violet and steel. Julian's headlights swept over winding roads where mist hovered just above the asphalt. Houses appeared now and then, warm squares of light behind curtains, smoke rising from chimneys. The sight filled him with something sharp and tender all at once. Each porch light seemed to whisper, "Someone's waiting somewhere." The GPS glowed faintly on the dashboard. Maple Hollow, 6 miles. His chest tightened. He hadn't said the town's name aloud in over a decade. It sounded smaller than he remembered, almost fragile. He rolled down the window. Cold air brushed his face, carrying the smell of rain and distant pine. In the hush between wiper strokes, he could almost hear his mother's voice calling him in for supper, the clang of his father's tools in the shed, the soft creak of that old screen door that never closed right. Up ahead, a neon sign flickered through the rain. Diner open 24 hours. He smiled. The same kind of diner where his parents used to stop on road trips, where strangers talked like neighbors and a slice of pie could fix anything. His stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since morning. He turned into the gravel lot, the tires crunching softly. Inside, warmth wrapped around him like a blanket. The air smelled of bacon grease, maple syrup, and coffee, brewed strong enough to wake the dead. A jukebox hummed somewhere in the corner, playing an old Patsy Cline song. Behind the counter, a woman in a red apron poured coffee for a line of regulars. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped in. She smiled automatically. "Evening, Honorable. Grab a seat anywhere you like." M. Julian chose a booth near the window. Rain streaked the glass. Neon light rippled across his table. He ordered coffee and an apple slice, mostly for the comfort of it. Around him, locals chatted about the coming storm, the high school football game, and who was bringing what to Thanksgiving supper. It felt like stepping into another time, one that hadn't forgotten how to slow down. When the waitress set down his plate, she said, "You from around here? Don't think I've seen you before." "Am." He hesitated. "Used to be. Maple Hollow's a good town," she said kindly. "Still is, mostly. Folks stick together." Then she nodded toward the window. "Where you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" He smiled faintly. "Home. At least I hope so." She gave a soft laugh, the kind that forgives everything. "Well, that's what the holidays are for. Sugar." He ate slowly, letting the warmth seep back into him. The pie tasted like the kind his mother used to make sweet, tart, with just a hint of cinnamon too strong at the edges. When he paid, he left a 20 under the check. The waitress blinked. "That's too much." Julian shook his head. "Keep it. Guess I'm trying to do a few things right for a change." Outside, the rain had eased to a mist. The neon sign buzzed softly above his car. He started the engine but didn't drive yet. For a long moment, he just watched the road curve into darkness, the faint glow of Maple Hollow somewhere beyond. He thought about calling his parents, hearing their voices before he arrived, but fear stopped him. What if they didn't want to hear his? He gripped the steering wheel, the leather cold under his palms. The pocket watch on the seat clicked with quiet certainty, marking the seconds he could never reclaim. He whispered, almost to himself, "I'll make it right." And sleep. The road out of the diner sloped gently downhill, leading into a valley wrapped in fog. He rolled the window halfway, letting rain mist his face. Streetlights glimmered on wet pavement, and every mile carried him deeper into a place that had waited without asking. The sign at the town's edge appeared suddenly through the mist. "Welcome to Maple Hollow, Pop. 3212." Julian slowed the car, taking it in. The letters were chipped, the paint faded, But beneath the grime he could still see the motto his father once helped paint during a summer fair. Home is where hearts remember. He pulled over for a moment, headlights idling against the sign. The rain whispered on the hood. Somewhere in the dark, a church bell struck 7, slow and steady. He took a breath that felt like forgiveness. Then, with both hands steady on the wheel, Julian Hartwell drove on toward the small town that had never stopped waiting for him. The bell above the diner door jingled a soft welcome as Julian stepped in again, drawn by the smell of coffee and the kind of chatter that fills empty spaces better than music. Morning light spilled through the big front window, catching the steam rising from a row of mugs behind the counter. Outside, rain still hung in the air, silver and slow. But inside, everything glowed in warm amber. He hadn't planned to stop twice, but the sign Maple Hollow Diner felt like an invitation he couldn't ignore. He wiped his shoes on the mat, brushed the chill from his coat, and took the same booth he had chosen the night before. A waitress with kind eyes and a tired smile noticed him right away. "Back so soon, sweetheart?" she teased. Julian smiled faintly. "Guess I like the coffee." Well, that's the first compliment we've had before 9 a.m. "I'm Marcia," she said, tucking a pencil behind her ear. "What'll it be?" "Just coffee, thank you. And maybe whatever pie's fresh today. Apple crumb. My daughter helped bake it." As Marcia turned, a small girl appeared from the kitchen, balancing a stack of napkins against her chest. She couldn't have been more than 8, brown hair falling over her face in straight, shiny strands. Her pink sneakers squeaked on the linoleum. When she looked up at Julian, her eyes were curious and bright, the color of maple sap in sunlight. "You're sitting in Mrs. Hartwell's booth," she said with the solemn certainty of children who know every secret of a small town. Julian blinked. "Emmy?" "Uh-huh. She and Mr. Hartwell always sit there on Sundays. They used to order pancakes and share one milkshake." He felt the air shift inside him, quiet and sharp. "Do they still come in?" The girl shook her head, straightening the napkins. "Not much now. Mom says they had some bad luck." Then she smiled suddenly, bright as the bell above the door. "You kind of look like their son. They have a picture of him at home." Julian's heart stumbled. "They do?" "Yeah," she said, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "They said he went to the city to build machines or something and got too busy to visit. But they keep his picture by the window so they can see him every day." The words fell softly, like rain on glass. Marcia returned just then with his coffee and a slice of pie, unaware of the stillness her daughter had left behind. "Lila, honey, go check table 4, she said. "And thank you for helping." "Yes, ma'am." The little girl Lila darted off, her sneakers squeaking again. Julian stirred his coffee without drinking. The pie sat untouched. Through the window, he could see the street bending toward the hill that led to Willow Street. The sign for the old church peeked through the fog. Everything felt both familiar and strange, like walking into a dream you'd half forgotten. When Marcia came back to refill his mug, he asked carefully, "You said your daughter baked with you. She's wonderful." "Thank you. Lila's got a big heart. Talks to everyone who walks in. Last week she brought Mrs. Hartwell a flower from the park and told her it was for missing people." Julian smiled faintly. "That sounds like her." He glanced again toward the window, where droplets ran slow down the glass. "They still live on Willow Street?" Marcia nodded. "Last I heard. The house has seen better days, poor souls. But they keep it tidy. Good folks, the Hartwells." Julian felt something inside him tighten and then release like a door long locked beginning to open. He finished his coffee, left another generous tip, and paused at the counter. "Tell your daughter the pie was perfect," he said softly. "She'll be glad to hear that." Marcia smiled, slipping the bill into the register. "Safe travels, mister." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air still shimmered with it. Julian stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching puddles catch the diner's yellow reflection. In the window, Lila waved at him with both hands. He waved back before turning toward the road that led uphill toward Willow Street. Julian walked slowly up Main Street, the sound of the diner's bell fading behind him. The air was cool and clean after the rain, carrying the scent of maple and wet pavement. Small-town life moved at its own rhythm. A delivery truck backing up near the post office, a boy riding his bike through puddles, a woman sweeping the front step of the pharmacy. Everyone seemed to know everyone else. It felt like time here had decided not to hurry. He passed a barber shop with striped poles, a church with its notice board reading Thanksgiving service all welcome, and a thrift store window filled with knitted scarves. Everything had the kind of imperfection that money couldn't buy, paint chipped by winters, steps creaking under honest weight. He hadn't realized how much he missed the sound of ordinary life. Halfway up the street, he stopped at a small park beside the library. The benches were damp, leaves gathered in corners. A plaque on the gate read Maple Hollow Memorial Garden. He remembered helping his father plant saplings here one summer, his hands small, the dirt cool and dark. The trees were tall now, branches stretched wide, like arms that had been waiting to hug him back. Julian sat for a while, letting the memories come. He thought of his mother's laugh echoing through the kitchen, the smell of cornbread on Sunday mornings, the way his father used to wipe his hands on that old red cloth before patting him on the shoulder. Somewhere along the road to success, those sounds had faded under boardrooms and deadlines, but the silence of Maple Hollow brought them back. A light tap on his sleeve startled him. Lila stood beside the bench, clutching a small brown envelope. "Hi," she said shyly. "Mom said you forgot your receipt, but I think you left it on purpose." Julian chuckled softly. "You're very observant." She shrugged. "Mom says I'm a talker. I like stories. Want to hear one?" "Sure." "My grandma says when the church bells ring and it's still raining, it means somebody's being forgiven." She tilted her head. "Is that true?" Julian looked up. Faint bells were indeed drifting through the fog. He swallowed. "I think your grandma's right." Lila grinned. "Then maybe it's for you." She handed him the envelope. Inside was a small photo, faded, creased at the corners. It was the same wedding picture he'd seen on his parents' mantel as a boy. His father in a gray suit, his mother holding daisies, the porch behind them bright with sunlight. His breath caught. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Mrs. Hartwell gave it to me," Lila said simply. "She said I could keep it, but maybe you should have it. She told me her son used to look just like you." The world seemed to tilt for a second. The sounds of the park, the dripping leaves, the hum of distant traffic faded into a single note of memory. Julian stared at the photo until his vision blurred. "Do they still live in the same house?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir. 2 streets over from here. The white one with the porch swing. But it's for sale now. There's a sign." Julian folded the picture carefully and slipped it into his wallet. "Thank you, Lila." She beamed. "You're welcome. Maybe you can visit them. They talk about their son all the time. I think they'd be really happy." He smiled, though his throat tightened. "Maybe I will." The girl skipped back toward the diner, her ponytail swinging, her sneakers squeaking against the wet pavement. Julian watched until she disappeared behind the door. The bell jingled once, a bright sound in the quiet street. He rose from the bench, heart thudding with something that felt like both fear and hope. The rain began again, light and steady. He pulled up his collar and started toward Willow Street. Each step echoed like a heartbeat through the puddles. At the corner, he paused to look back. Through the diner window, Lila waved once more, a blur of pink and gold against the warm light. He lifted a hand in return, then turned toward the hill. Beyond the next street, the old neighborhood waited houses standing shoulder to shoulder under bare trees, smoke curling from chimneys. Somewhere among them was the house where he had taken his first steps, told his first lie, and whispered his first apology. The place where he had learned what love looked like before he forgot its shape. As he climbed, the rain thickened again, whispering against his coat. The road narrowed, and the street sign came into view. Willow Street. Beneath it, the silhouette of a house appeared through the mist, familiar, yet strange. Its windows dark, porch light flickering. Julian stopped at the gate, water running down his face. His fingers brushed the wet wood, as if testing whether it was real. He drew a breath that trembled in his chest. For a long moment he just stood there, listening to the rain and the faint echo of church bells far behind him. Then, slowly, he pushed open the gate and stepped forward. The road curved uphill between maples that had already shed most of their leaves. Rain beaded on the hood of Julian's car and gathered in long, glistening trails down the windshield. At the top of the hill, the houses changed older now, wooden porches leaning a little, fences patched with care. He slowed to a crawl, studying each one as though they might recognize him. Number 47 Willow Street came into view. The house still wore its white paint, though it had faded to the color of parchment. The porch swing hung crooked, one chain shorter than the other, and the gutters sagged with wet leaves. Yet there was a dignity about it, like an old soldier standing at attention long after the parade had passed. The mailbox still bore the faint letters, Hartwell. He parked across the street, engine idling, unable to move. The yard was smaller than memory allowed. The big oak out front had lost half its branches, but the same tire swing dangled there, swaying slightly in the drizzle. He could almost see himself at 8 years old, pumping his legs higher, shouting for his father to watch. He remembered his mother's voice from the porch calling, "Careful, Jules! Supper's ready!" Julian sat gripping the steering wheel, breath fogging the glass. A "For Sale by Owner" sign leaned against the front step, its red letters running with rain. Something twisted in his chest. He had left this house for a future so bright it blinded him. Now it looked back at him like a wounded friend. He shut off the engine and stepped out. The air was cold and smelled of wet earth. Each step across the street felt heavier. The porch boards creaked beneath his weight, just as they used to. He reached for the doorbell, but stopped, hand hovering. Through the window he saw nothing but shadows and a single chair facing the empty fireplace. The curtains were drawn, yet a faint flicker of light glowed from somewhere down the block, near the old church. A gust of wind pushed rain into his face. He turned toward the light. Across the street, beneath the church awning, 2 figures sat close together, wrapped in a blanket. For a heartbeat, he thought it was an illusion, some trick of fog and memory. But then one of them moved, and he recognized the stoop of those shoulders. The slow, careful gesture of a man whose hands had fixed everything in his life, except the distance from his son. Julian's breath caught. "Dad?" The word slipped out before he could stop it. He started across the street, rain splashing around his shoes. The older man lifted his head, eyes narrowing against the light of passing cars. Next to him, a woman turned hair silver now, face pale under the lamplight. She pressed a hand to her mouth. Julian? He froze halfway between them, unable to breathe. The world seemed to hold still, the rain, the sound of traffic, even the ticking pocket watch in his coat. Then he stepped forward, one slow step after another, until he stood before them. They were thinner than he remembered, older, of course, but it was their eyes that undid him, tired and kind, the same as always. His father rose stiffly, blanket falling away from his shoulders. "Son," Walter said, voice low and rough from years of disuse, "you're really here." Julian opened his mouth, but no words came. Only rain filled the silence, soft and forgiving. He knelt on the wet pavement before them, reaching out as if to make sure they were real. For a moment none of them spoke. Rain whispered on the roof of the church and down the gutter pipes, steady as breath. Julian looked up at his father and mother, faces wet with rain, eyes wide in disbelief. He had imagined this meeting 1,000 ways, none of them as quiet or as human as this. "Mom," he managed finally, his voice trembling. "Dad, I'm sorry, I came too late." Marjorie knelt beside him, her knees pressing into the cold pavement. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, touching his cheek with a hand that shook. "You came when it mattered." Her palm was soft and warm even in the rain. She drew him closer, and for the first time in years, Julian let himself be held. Walter stood over them, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "We wondered if you'd ever find your way back," he said quietly. "But we didn't stop hoping." He cleared his throat, eyes searching his son's face. "Camille told us you were too busy, said you didn't want reminders of where you came from." Julian closed his eyes, guilt crashing over him like the downpour around them. "She lied," he said. "I didn't know about any of it." Walter's jaw tightened. "She sold the house, said it was for your expansion project. We signed the papers because she said it was your wish." The words hit like stones. "She forged my name," Julian whispered. "She took everything that meant something and turned it into profit." His father's face softened with pity instead of anger. "Money's a poor trade for peace, son. Don't let her rob you of that too." Marjorie pulled Julian's face toward hers. "Listen to your father. We don't need the house, Julian. We only needed you." Lightning flashed behind them, white and brief, lighting the cross above the church door. Julian rose, pulling his parents beneath the awning where they could stand dry for a while. He removed his coat and wrapped it around his mother's shoulders. the same way she used to tuck a blanket around him on cold nights. Inside the church, faint music drifted from a choir rehearsal voices, rising softly. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. The words fell through the open doorway, like a benediction. Julian leaned against the wall, tears mixing with the rain on his face. I don't know how to fix what I've broken, he said. His father placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. Start by coming home. Everything else can wait. They stood like that for a long time, 3 shadows under the yellow porch light. The years between them seemed to melt into the puddles at their feet. When a gust of wind pushed the rain sideways again, Julian guided his parents toward his car. The door creaked open, releasing the warmth trapped inside. He turned the heater high and found an old flannel blanket in the back seat, one he used during long drives. Marjorie smiled faintly when he covered her knees. Still, thinking ahead even now, she said softly. You always were a planner. Julian gave a small laugh. Planning's all I ever did, Mom. Feeling, that's what I forgot. The wipers beat a slow rhythm as they drove down Willow Street. Houses slid past, lights glowing gold behind lace curtains. Julian glanced at his father in the mirror. The old man's eyes were closed, lips moving in silent prayer. His mother hummed along with the radio, a gospel station fading in and out through static. The sound of it wrapped the car in a kind of fragile peace. They passed the diner. Through the fogged glass, Julian saw little Lila Monroe wiping tables beside her mother. The girl looked up just in time to wave, her small hand catching the lamplight. He lifted a hand in return, a silent thank you she'd never hear. By the time they reached Maple Hollow Inn, the rain had gentled to mist. Julian helped his parents inside, guiding them to a booth near the fireplace. The clerk, a round man in a cardigan, recognized them instantly and hurried to fetch towels. Been a rough season, hasn't it? He said kindly. You folks all right? Walter nodded, squeezing Julian's shoulder. We're better now. Oh. While his parents sipped hot tea, Julian stepped outside for a moment. The inn's porch overlooked the valley rooftops glistening, the church spire gleaming faintly under the streetlight. He took out the pocket watch, its ticking louder now in the quiet. Midnight was near. He opened it, staring at the second hand circling the face. Steady, tireless, patient, just like the people who had loved him long enough to wait. When he turned back, his mother was standing at the doorway, her blanket around her shoulders. Come sit, darling. You look cold. He smiled, slipping the watch into his pocket. I'm fine, Mom. Just thinking. About what? About how lucky I am to still have a place to come back to. She nodded gently. That's what home is, Julian. Not walls, not paint. Just hearts that stay open. Her words hung in the air as the last of the rain faded into fog. Julian followed her back inside, where his father waited by the fire. Together they sat in silence. The only sound the soft crackle of burning wood and the whisper of rain sliding down the windows. Outside, the sign of the inn creaked in the wind. In its glow, 3 figures could be seen through the window. A family, long divided, finding warmth again. And somewhere, far beyond the hills, the dawn was beginning to rise over Vermont. Morning came softly to Maple Hollow. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air washed clean and sweet. Mist clung to the hills like memory refusing to lift. Inside the small inn, sunlight crept through lace curtains, touching the worn carpet, the wooden chairs, and the 3 cups of coffee cooling on the table. Julian watched his parents across the breakfast nook. Marjorie's silver hair gleamed in the early light, her hands wrapped around her mug for warmth. Walter sat beside her, reading the local paper, his glasses slipping down his nose. The picture was so ordinary, so peaceful, that Julian felt his throat tighten. It had been years since he'd seen them like this, years he could never give back. He cleared his throat gently. How long have you been staying at the church? Walter folded the paper. A few weeks. After the sale went through, there wasn't much choice. We didn't want charity. Marjorie touched his arm. Pastor Lewis has been kind. He lets us help with meals. And the ladies bring casseroles. Folks here, look out for one another. Julian nodded, guilt settling heavy on his chest. I should have known. I should have. His mother stopped him with a raised hand. We all should have done something different, sweetheart. But here we are. That's what matters. Walter reached for his cup, What will you do now, son? Go back to Boston? Julian looked down at his hands. Hands that had built fortunes and broken promises. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I came here to fix what I broke. That means staying long enough to see it right. His father studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Your mother and I never needed grand gestures. We just wanted to know you were all right. Julian smiled faintly. I wasn't. Not for a long time. But I think I'm getting there. They spent the morning walking through town together. The sidewalks were slick but bright, lined with pumpkins left from Halloween, their faces softened by rain. People greeted Walter and Marjorie by name. When they noticed Julian, a few nodded politely, unsure where to place the stranger with city shoes and eyes full of regret. At the diner, Marcia Monroe waved from the window, flour on her apron. Lila pressed her nose against the glass and drew a little heart with her fingertip when she saw them. Julian laughed softly. She doesn't miss much, does she? His mother smiled. Children see what adults forget to look for. They stopped by the old house once more. The for sale sign still leaned crooked near the porch. Julian stepped up onto the boards, feeling them creak underfoot. He traced the doorframe where his height had been marked in pencil as a boy faded numbers still visible beneath chipped paint. His father stood at the bottom of the steps, watching quietly. I want to buy it back, Julian said suddenly. Whatever it takes. Walter frowned. Son, that's not necessary. Yes, it is. It's our home, and it'll stay that way. Walter shook his head gently. You don't owe us a house, Julian. You owe yourself peace. Don't confuse the two. Julian's voice broke a little. You don't understand. That place, this place, it's where everything good in me began. If I can bring it back to life, maybe I can bring us back too. Marjorie joined them on the porch, resting a hand on her son's shoulder. Then do it, darling. But not out of guilt. Do it because you want to see something bloom again. The door opened slightly under his hand. The air inside smelled of dust and cedar, the same scent that had lived in his childhood. Light streamed through cracks in the shutters, illuminating floating specks like tiny ghosts of the past. He stepped inside. Every creak of the floorboard spoke of birthdays, arguments, laughter, goodbyes, all the life he'd left behind chasing numbers on screens. He turned to his parents standing in the doorway, their silhouettes framed by soft light. I don't deserve this, he said quietly. Walter's eyes softened. None of us deserve grace, son. That's why it's called grace. And that evening, the three of them sat on the porch of the inn. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the air smelling of pine and wood smoke. Fireflies blinked among the hedges, and somewhere down the hill, the bell of St. Matthew's Church marked 6 o'clock. Julian sat between his parents, wrapped in one of the inn's old quilts. For the first time in years, silence felt comfortable. Marjorie leaned her head on his shoulder, and he could feel her breathing steady, alive. You used to sit like this every night, she said softly, even after the stories were done. Julian smiled faintly. I didn't realize how much I missed it. Walter gazed out at the road, his voice low. You came home, son. That's enough for one lifetime. Julian turned to him. It's not enough. I want to make it right for both of you. You already have, Walter said. We're together. That's what right looks like. The sky deepened to purple. Cars passed now and then, their headlights tracing silver lines on the wet pavement. Julian took the pocket watch from his coat and set it on the table. It ticked softly in the quiet. You gave me this before I left, he said. Said it would remind me where I came from. Walter chuckled. Guess it finally did. Julian looked at them both, his throat thick. I don't know how I let so much time slip away. Marjorie touched his hand. Time doesn't matter when love waits. Tears came then quiet, unashamed. He leaned forward, and they drew him close. The three of them held on, not saying anything more. Just breathing, just being. The porch light flickered gently above them, casting a warm halo over their embrace. When they finally parted, Julian whispered, I'll rebuild the house, room by room. I'll bring back the garden. Maybe open a little workshop in town. Marjorie smiled through tears. Whatever you do, just stay a while. He nodded, looking out toward Willow Street, where the first stars were beginning to show. For the first time in years, he felt still as if his heart had finally stopped running. In the distance, the diner sign flickered to life. and he thought of Lila waving through the window. He imagined her laughter, the smell of coffee, the soft sound of rain against glass. Ordinary things, the kind that make a life whole again. And as the night settled around them, Julian closed his eyes, resting his head against his mother's shoulder. The world, for once, felt exactly right. Julian hadn't planned to return to Boston so soon, yet the call came on a Wednesday morning while his parents still slept. It was his attorney, Mason Crane, a man whose voice always carried a hint of alarm. "She's filing for spousal support," Mason said flatly. "And she's contesting your claims of fraud." Julian stared at the old pocket watch taking on the nightstand. "Let her. I'm not hiding anymore." He hung up, packed a small suitcase, and kissed his mother's forehead before leaving. "Just a few days," he whispered. "Then I'll be home." The drive down to Boston was long and gray. The highway unrolled through rain, and every mile felt like peeling away another layer of the man he used to be. He arrived at the city by dusk glass towers glinting under low clouds, neon reflections flickering on the wet asphalt. He parked in front of the office building that once bore his name, Hartwell Dynamics. The gold letters still gleamed, though someone had already replaced his space in the lot with Executive Director Camille Hartwell. Inside, the lobby smelled of polished marble and old ambition. He took the elevator to the top floor, where the doors opened to a view of the skyline. She was waiting. Camille stood by the glass wall, sleek in a gray suit, her hair coiled perfectly, her smile sharp. "Well," she said without turning, "the prodigal finally returns." Julian didn't rise to the bait. "You took everything," he said, "including my parents' home." She turned, one eyebrow arching. "I took what you gave me, Julian. Power of attorney, control of the assets. You signed the papers. I merely acted on them. You lied. You threw them out into the rain." Her expression barely changed. "They were holding you back. I did what you were too weak to do." Julian's hands curled into fists, then slowly opened. "You don't even hear yourself, do you? You think success means never looking back. But without them, I became nothing." Camille's eyes flashed. "Nothing? You're still worth millions. You could rebuild everything tomorrow." "I don't want to rebuild what we had," he said quietly. "It was built on pride. For a moment, the room held only the hum of the city beyond the glass. Camille looked away, her voice lower now. "Do you know what it was like, watching you worship those two? Every decision always about them. I wanted a husband, not a saint." Julian took a breath, steadying his tone. "And I wanted someone who believed in compassion." "I'm not angry anymore, Camille. I just want you to understand, you can't own people's hearts." Something flickered across her face. Regret, maybe, or exhaustion. She stepped closer, her voice softening. "You really mean to walk away?" "I already did." He placed a small envelope on her desk, the deed transfer papers for the house, nullifying her claim. "The courts can handle the rest, but you'll never have to see me again." Camille stood frozen as he walked toward the elevator. "Julian," she called. He stopped. "Waiting. You'll regret this." He looked back at her, calm and certain. "No. For the first time, I won't." The elevator doors slid shut between them, sealing the past on the other side. The next morning, the city woke beneath a pale Sunday. Julian stood before the glass doors of a downtown law office, his reflection caught between skyscrapers. Inside, reporters waited not for scandal, but for truth. He stepped to the podium, notes trembling slightly in his hands. "My name is Julian Hartwell," he began. "I built a company that forgot the value of honesty. The people I love paid for that mistake. So today, I'm returning what was never mine to keep." Cameras flashed, but his voice stayed steady. He announced his resignation, the transfer of his shares to a charitable trust, and a community fund in Maple Hollow to rebuild homes for those displaced by corporate expansion. "Some debts," he said quietly, "can't be measured in money, but kindness is still a currency that never loses value." When it was done, he left without answering questions. The city noise faded behind him as he walked toward the train station, carrying nothing but a duffel and the ticking pocket watch. On the train back to Vermont, he opened a small envelope Walter had slipped into his coat that morning. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, his father's handwriting, firm but uneven. Son, forgiveness isn't a gift you earn. It's a door you open and step through. Once you do, you don't need to look back. We're proud of you. Come home soon. Julian smiled through tears, folding the letter carefully. Outside, fields rolled by gold and green beneath a sky that seemed to breathe again. He rested his hand on the pocket watch, feeling each tick like a heartbeat. When the train slowed near Maple Hollow Station, he saw the church spire in the distance, the diner sign blinking faintly, and a girl waving from the platform, Lila, with a paper bag in her hand. He waved back, laughter breaking free for the first time in years. The train hissed to a stop. Julian stepped down into the cool afternoon air, the scent of pine and fresh bread drifting from the cafe. The world felt lighter, as if, in choosing truth over pride, he had finally come home to himself. The train's whistle faded into the hills as Julian stepped off the platform, suitcase in one hand, pocket watch in the other. The sky had cleared completely, pale blue stretching over the maple trees that lined the town. The air smelled of sawdust and apple pie from the diner across the street. Everything looked smaller, gentler, as if the world itself had decided to speak in softer tones. "Mr. Hartwell?" a voice called. He turned to see Marcia Monroe, her red apron still dusted with flour, waving from the cafe doorway. "Heavens, it really is you. The whole town's been talking. I saw the article this morning." Julian smiled faintly. "Good things, I hope." "Better than good," she said, walking over. "You did what few folks would, took the blame and gave back more than you owed. Folks respect that here." "Thank you, Marcia. You'll want something to eat. Come inside before I start mothering you." The diner looked just as it had weeks before, same red booths, same bell above the door. Lila was perched on a stool, swinging her legs while sipping a chocolate milkshake. When she saw him, her eyes widened. "You came back? I told you I would," Julian said, sitting beside her. "Is that for me?" She giggled and pushed the milkshake toward him. "Mom says everyone deserves a sweet start." He took a sip, smiling. "Your mom's right." The bell jingled again, and Walter and Marjorie entered. The room hushed for a moment, not out of judgment but reverence. People who'd watched them struggle now watched them heal. Walter nodded to Marcia, who quickly brought 3 steaming mugs of coffee. "On the house," she said softly. They sat together near the window, where morning sunlight poured in. Marjorie reached for her son's hand. "I saw what you did, Julian. We watched it on the news at the inn. Your father cried." Walter grumbled, half smiling. "Wasn't crying. Just had dust in my eye." Julian laughed. "I know, Dad. He told them everything. The press conference, Camille's silence, the letter, the decision to start again. "I want to rebuild the old house," he said finally. "Not just for us, for this town. Maybe turn it into something that gives back." Marjorie looked curious. "What do you have in mind?" "A workshop," Julian said. "A place where folks can learn trades again. Carpentry, mechanics, crafts. Somewhere people can create with their hands instead of screens." Walter leaned back, thoughtful. "You know, your granddad would have liked that. He built half the furniture in this town." "Then maybe we'll build the rest," Julian replied. Marcia overheard and came over, wiping her hands. "You do that and we'll make sure every volunteer's fed. Maple Hollow runs on coffee and casseroles." They all laughed, and for the first time, Julian felt something inside him loosen the last knot of guilt, untangling into gratitude. Outside, children chased each other down the street, their laughter echoing against the storefronts. The church bell rang noon, and people began to gather for the weekly market by the square. Lila tugged Julian's sleeve. "Come on! They have the best pumpkin bread!" He glanced at his parents, who nodded. "Go on, son," Walter said. "We'll be right behind you." No. Julian followed the girl out into the sunlight, the town unfolding around him like an old photograph come to life, familiar, imperfect, and exactly enough. By late afternoon, sunlight slanted golden through the branches, washing the town square in soft light. Julian walked with Lila past the booths of homemade jams, knitted scarves, and apple cider in glass jugs. People greeted him now, some shyly, some with firm handshakes, the kind of welcome reserved for those who'd once been lost and found their way home again. At the far end of the square stood a notice board covered in flyers. Someone had pinned up an article from the Boston Herald. Hartwell CEO donates fortune to restore Maple Hollow. Beneath it, someone had scrawled in blue ink, "Welcome home, Julian." He stood staring for a long moment, unable to speak. Lila tugged his sleeve. "See? They like you." Julian smiled, voice thick. "Guess I'll have to stay worthy of it." That evening, he drove with his parents back up Willow Street. The sky blushed pink and violet, and the house appeared ahead, still worn, still waiting. A few townspeople were already there. Marcia, her brother Tom with his toolbox, 2 young carpenters from the church. Someone had strung up lights along the porch rail. Walter stopped short. "What's all this?" Marcia grinned. "You said rebuild, didn't you?" "Well, Maple Hollow doesn't waste time. We thought we'd start tonight." Julian blinked, overwhelmed. "You did this?" Tom chuckled. "You brought the reason. We just brought the hammers." They worked until the first stars came out. Someone played an old radio, its crackling music floating through the cool air. Julian sanded window frames beside his father, while Lila painted the porch swing white again. Marjorie hummed softly as she swept the front steps, pausing every so often to watch them all with teary pride. When the final bulb flickered to life over the porch, everyone stepped back. The house glowed gently against the night, not perfect, not finished, but alive again. Walter handed Julian a small hammer. "Your turn, son. Tradition says the man who left should drive the first nail of homecoming." Julian smiled, gripping the handle. The nails slid in easily, each tap ringing like a heartbeat. When it was done, he looked up at the glowing windows and whispered, "Welcome home." Applause broke out around him, soft, honest, unpolished. Marjorie wiped her eyes. "It's beautiful, Julian. It's all we ever wanted." The crowd began to drift away, calling goodnights as fireflies danced among the trees. Julian stood with his parents on the porch, looking out at the quiet town. "You know," he said, "I used to think coming home meant going backward. But maybe it just means remembering what matters most." Walter smiled. "That's what folks around here have been trying to tell you all along." They stood together until the porch light dimmed and the stars brightened overhead. Lila's laughter echoed faintly down the street as she skipped home with her mother. The air smelled of pine, sawdust, and pie, cooling in distant kitchens, the scent of belonging. Julian slipped the pocket watch from his coat and listened to its steady ticking. For the first time, it didn't sound like time running out. It sounded like time beginning again. Winter arrived softly in Maple Hollow. Frost traced lace patterns along the windows, and each morning the air smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. By December, the town had begun stringing lights along every porch and lamppost for the annual Festival of Lights, a tradition older than most of its residents. This year, for the first time in more than a decade, the Hartwell house on Willow Street would join again. Julian stood on the front lawn with a box of tangled bulbs at his feet. Walter knelt beside him, humming under his breath, while Marjorie directed from the porch with a mug of cocoa in hand. "Higher, Walter," she called. "You've got the star crooked again." Walter laughed. "If it's crooked, it's tradition." And neighbors wandered over to help Marcia with a tray of cookies, Tom Monroe carrying an extension cord, even Lila bundled in her red scarf, clutching a thermos almost as tall as she was. "I brought cocoa for everyone," she announced proudly. Julian knelt to her level. "You're a hero, Miss Lila." She grinned. "Mom says heroes don't wear capes. They hang lights." As dusk deepened, the town square came alive. A brass band played carols near the gazebo. Children chased each other through the snow, leaving boot prints like tiny stories across the white. Someone started a bonfire, and the scent of pine and cider drifted up the hill to Willow Street. When the last bulb was in place, Julian plugged in the cord. For a moment nothing happened. Then the house glowed with soft golden light, windows warm, roofline shining like memory reborn. The crowd below let out a cheer that echoed down the street. Marjorie wiped her eyes. "It's perfect, Julian." He smiled, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "It's ours again." Walter nodded, his voice rough. "You know, I never thought I'd see this house lit again." Julian looked around at the faces glowing in the light, friends, neighbors, strangers who had become family. "I didn't do this alone, Dad. None of us did." Later, as snow began to fall, Pastor Lewis from the church arrived with a small lantern. He handed it to Julian. Every year, we pass this flame from one family to another. It's a reminder that hope doesn't fade, it just changes hands. Would you do the honor this year? Julian took the lantern carefully. Its light flickered against his coat, warm and steady. He carried it to the porch and set it beside the old rocking chair his father had built 40 years ago. For every home still waiting to be whole, he said softly. Applause rippled through the crowd. Lila tugged his sleeve. Mr. Hartwell, are you going to make the workshop? He laughed. Already started. The first class begins after New Year's. Can I come? You'll be our youngest apprentice. Marcia smiled from the crowd. Told you she'd find a way to run the place before you do. Snow thickened, turning the air silver. The band began to play Silent Night, and voices joined one by one until the whole town was singing. The lights reflected in every window, every tear, every smile. For the first time, the Hartwell house was not a relic of loss, but a beacon proof that broken things could shine again. As the carols faded, Julian slipped the pocket watch from his coat. It ticked steadily beneath the snowfall, each beat echoing like a pulse of grace. He looked at his parents, their hands clasped, faces lifted to the light, and felt something settle quietly inside him. Not triumph, not regret, peace. He turned to the crowd. Thank you, Maple Hollow, he said simply, for teaching me what home really means. The wind carried his words down the hill, through the market, past the diner, and into every corner of the little town that had waited for him to return. Children laughed, bells chimed, and the last of the snow began to fall like confetti over a second chance. Julian reached for his parents and drew them close, their shoulders touching under the soft glow of the lights. Around them, the town sparkled a constellation of small kindnesses shining through the cold. And above the door, where a new sign had just been hung, the porch light flickered gently beside words, freshly painted in gold. Home is where hearts remember. When the songs faded, the townspeople began to drift home through the snow, carrying lanterns that cast small circles of light on the road. The laughter of children lingered in the air like the echo of bells. Julian stayed on the porch with his parents, watching until the last lantern disappeared behind the hill. The night had settled deep and still. Only the creak of the swing and the soft hum of the pocket watch filled the quiet. Walter leaned back, exhaling. You did good, son. I didn't think we'd see this place alive again. Julian looked around the glowing windows, the wreath on the door, the soft snow piling on the steps. We all did it, Dad. I just followed where love pointed. Em? Marjorie smiled, her eyes reflecting the lights. You learned the hardest lesson there is, that sometimes coming home isn't about being forgiven, but forgiving yourself. Julian nodded slowly. It took losing everything to see what I already had. From down the street came the faint sound of Lila's laughter. She was walking with her mother, holding a paper lantern high above her head. Its light flickered like a tiny star against the night sky. Julian watched until she vanished around the corner, the glow fading softly, not gone, just moving forward. He stood, brushed the snow from his coat, and looked toward the town below. Maple Hollow shimmered under the falling snow, every rooftop glistening. Somewhere, church bells began to ring midnight, their slow, solemn rhythm blending with the whisper of wind through the trees. Julian opened the pocket watch, its face catching the glow of the porch light. For a long moment he just listened to its steady ticking, then whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't clear if he was speaking to God, to his parents, or to time itself. Maybe all three. Marjorie slipped her arm through his. Come inside, sweetheart. The cocoa's getting cold. He smiled, closing the watch. After all this time, Mom, I think I finally know what warm feels like. They went in together, the door closing gently behind them. Through the frosted window, the light from inside spilled onto the snow, glowing softly against the dark. The porch lamp flickered once more steady, bright, as if promising to burn for every soul who ever found their way home. Sometimes, the quietest endings are the ones that stay with us the longest. When the snow fell over Maple Hollow and the lights of the Hartwell house glowed softly against the night, it wasn't wealth or power that shone there. It was forgiveness. Julian's long road back home wasn't about reclaiming what he'd lost, but rediscovering what he'd left behind. The simple warmth of family, the peace that comes from saying I'm sorry and meaning it. and the grace of being welcomed despite your mistakes. If you listen closely, maybe you can still hear the hum of that old porch swing, the faint tick of the pocket watch marking another quiet moment of mercy. Somewhere out there, an old man is teaching a young boy how to build a table. A mother is lighting a lamp for her grown child's return. Life moves in circles like that, small, patient, full of second chances. The lesson, I think, is simple yet eternal. Love and redemption build stronger homes than money ever could. Unconditional kindness, the kind that asks for nothing, has the power to mend even the deepest cracks in a person's heart. Everyone deserves a place to belong, and everyone, no matter how far they've strayed, can find their way back. As folks in Maple Hollow would say, home isn't just four walls, it's the people who keep the porch light on. It reminds me of something you might see on any American winter evening: a grandmother setting an extra plate at the dinner table just in case, or a neighbor leaving fresh pie on the doorstep without a note. Small gestures, quiet love. And yet, those are the things that keep the world warm. Like a soft lamp glowing in a window, one simple act of goodness can guide us through the darkest roads of our lives. So tonight, as you finish this story, maybe take a moment to think of the people who once kept a light on for you. Call them, write to them, or simply whisper a prayer of thanks. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. And love, well, it never really leaves. It just waits for us to come home. If this story touched your heart, press 1 inch the comments so we know it reached you. And if there's something you'd like to share or improve, press 0. Every thought, every reflection matters here. If this story made you feel something, I invite you to stay with us, not out of habit, but out of heart. Because stories like these remind us that kindness still lives in the smallest towns, in the softest voices, and maybe, just maybe, in you.